Hello, I'm Dr. Richard Scott Noakes of Troy University, and here in part of our set of interviews about pioneers in digital publishing, we have Michael McNamara. Now, Michael McNamara, like many of our guests, have been, not have been pioneers. They start off at a time when the industry either didn't exist or was just beginning, and he has 15 years of professional experience. He is today the technical architect and one of the co-founders of Witan Publishing, of which I am also one of the founders, which is how one of the ways I know him. I already knew him before this. And so just to give you a sense of his professional experience, as I mentioned, before he began Witan Publishing, he was a programmer for the Alabama Department of Public Health. Today, over the last decade, he is a senior consultant in doing cybersecurity for a major multinational consulting firm, one that you would probably recognize the name of, but we will not be saying here today. And in the time that he's worked for Witan Publishing, he has produced 15 books, print and electronic form, some in both form. He's innovated completely new ways of displaying poetry in ebooks, including one for an award-winning translation. He's produced facsimile editions. He's done all sorts of things in producing these that had never been done before, really at the beginning of digital publishing. Welcome, Michael. I want to ask you a little bit about how did you move from being a programmer at the Alabama Department of Public Health to being a co-founder of a publishing company?
The important thing there is the networking. It's all about networking. You have to know a lot of people, know a lot of different types of people. College is the perfect time to make those sorts of connections. As much networking as I did in college, I still wish I would have done more, because it's very easy. It's very easy when you're in college to think that all your achievements in life will come from your own personal ability. Mm-hmm. And it's only until a little bit, not much later, just a little bit later in life, you realize, oh no, it's who you know. Mm-hmm. And I happen to know a group of people who were English majors, a lot of English majors I know, including one professor that I'm talking to right now, that just lightning hit at the right moment. And kind of my technology expertise and their knowledge of the written word just kind of meshed together perfectly to make a company.
So tell us a little bit about your history in digital publishing. What exactly does this mean, technical architect for Witan Publishing? What do you do, and what have you been doing for the last decade?
To me, a technical architect is your person who just brings everything together. You have to bring together your talented people who are actually creating the written word, and you're kind of the glue in between your talent and the actual distribution sources. Your distribution sources being wherever someone is finally purchasing the book. Whether it's an actual physical store or an online storefront like Amazon or Kobo, which used to be Borders. You've got to create the glue in between there. You have to turn, what you'll be getting from your talent, which is essentially just a Word doc, if you're lucky, and you have to turn that into something that can eventually be either printed into a book or sent to someone's Kindle or Kobo.
Yeah, and one thing that what a technical architect will do for a publishing company like Witan is mostly invisible. The reader doesn't think about them until you get on maybe to one of the platforms, and they'll sell like a free version of a book or a 99-cent version of a book, and you realize someone just scanned some pages of a physical book and slapped them up, and they're basically unreadable at this point. If you've done your job, most of what you've done will be invisible because there won't be the mistake there for someone to notice. So yeah.
Those terrible scans you're talking about, that's what we don't do at Witan. Every book we publish is a bespoke. It is created by itself as a book.
Yeah. So let's say that a book comes in the editors we're happy with the book. It's gone through the peer review process and everything's ready. Peer review be something that if someone's writing for scholarly press would do, but there's otherwise a kind of editorial process. And then it comes to you. You get the file, and the other editors have said, all right, make this a book. What does that look like?
There's a lot. There's a lot that happens at that point. That's when you start doing your magic as a technical, the technical architect. You don't want me to sit here and describe how I do it from bit to bit, right?
Well, not every bit, but just sort of, can you talk about the general phases of what you'd have to do?
Okay. The general phases are usually at that point when you get, when the editors are done with the work. It's basically in the same format, and by format I mean Word doc or something like that the people actually, your talent eventually wrote it in. So it's like, your editors are doing their editing on the same document that the people actually wrote. So the first thing you have to do as the technical side of the business is you have to convert that into something else. And that'll be different depending on your own workflow. I've got my own way I do that. I convert it into one format. It's kind of like it's like I basically start taking it apart. In like, for music, I would be taking the music down into its component tracks, and that's the opposite of how music is actually made. But for this kind of work, that's how I have to do it. I have to take the Word document and start cutting it down into individual little tracks. And then you have to reform those into whatever format you're trying to sell it in. If that's a print book, then there'll be, you'd think it would be as easy as, well, you just get the Word document from the editors and then you send that to the printers. No, there is, whatever is eventually sent to the print department is completely different from what you got from the editors. And that is just the way it has to be done. If it's an ebook, then you have taken down that Word document you've gotten from the editors, turned it into code, and then made that code work as an ebook. And that's actually just as hard as doing it for print, because, while a print book looks like one way and everybody's buying that one version of a print book, an ebook has to go to, 100 different types of places that people could possibly be reading it on: a laptop, a phone, a specialized ebook reader like a Kindle, a tablet like an iPad. There's so many different ways. Some people, I've heard of some very strange people taking ebooks and actually printing them out into paper. So you actually do have to factor that in. That's part of what I have to factor in. Okay, if somebody actually printed this out, what it would look like. So you have to factor all that in. There's a lot of glue. I can't really talk about the specific parts of it because it's truly not important. However, in this process may change 10 years from now. 10 years from now, I may be doing it completely differently. Part of my job is being nimble enough to change with the times as they come.
And at the beginning, all this was so new that you were kind of having to invent every part from the workflow and everything from nothing.
Yeah. There were, I wasn't the first person to make an ebook in 2011. People had done it before, but they had done it, in my opinion, it not as good a way as it could be done. Like people were making movies before the 1950s, but they were not as good as movies post 1950, if you know what I mean. There were ebooks before we came around. We've started making them a lot better, and generally the industry itself has kind of caught up to and finally started, making ebooks that when I buy a book on a Kindle now, I don't have to worry about it looking like garbage. When 10 years ago, I would buy an ebook from a major publisher, and I won't name the names, but a major publisher, and their ebook would look like crap. And I would sit here and wonder, how are they not able to make an ebook as good as I am? And it's just, they just weren't trying as hard. They do better now, typically.
So most of maybe all of our students who are watching this for our class will be interested, not in the technical side, but are interested in being writers or editors themselves. So coming from your perspective, you're, I think, the only person we're going to have coming from your perspective. What advice do you have for writers and editors? Things that they should, it might not have to change the content, but things they need to think about when they're writing or editing
Sure.
for something in any digital format, whether it be a website or an ebook?
Mm-hmm. Some common things you can think about, and I wish I had more advice. I'm not a writer myself, but I do work with a lot of writers. So, one of the biggest things as a writer you should always be concerned about, and as any writer, you understand it on a high level. Who is going to be reading my work? If you don't think about who's going to be reading your book, and I don't mean just all of the world. No, I mean specifically who's going to be reading your book. What type of person are you targeting with your book? You should be thinking of that. You should be thinking of in your mind what they look like, what age are they, where do they live, what are they going to be reading your book on? If you're publishing it digitally, which I think no matter what, most publishing in the future is going to be done. We're always going to have print books, but most publishing going forward from this point is going to be read on a screen. You have to think about, okay, what are they going to be reading it on? Are they going to be reading it on their computer? Are they going to be reading it on a phone? Are they going to be reading it on a Kindle? Those kind of things I talked about before. So, don't, like, if you're going to have pictures in your book, think about, you have to work and make sure those pictures are, the best thing to do is you make sure the pictures are as large as possible. They have to be, when you're submitting your work to your publisher like us, I would say, and we've had this before with a few books in our past, we've gotten submissions where the images they submitted to us were very small because they looked good. They looked good on whatever screen the writer was working on. And I had to tell them that's not big enough. You have to give me your full source. You have to give me the uncompressed version of whatever you're working with. So it's going to have to be way bigger than you think it needs to be, because I need to work with the largest format so I can size it down. For print, it needs to be enormous. Typically, like if you actually show on a typical computer screen the width of an image that you needed to submit to your publisher, it would probably be 5 times as wide as your computer screen. You have to pan and zoom across it to see, and that's the size it needs to be. If you're dealing with special characters in your work, any sort of interesting Old English characters or characters in a foreign alphabet that we don't use in America typically, you have to really think about that when you submit that to your publisher. Your publisher most of the time will be able to figure that out, but they may very well need help from you as a writer, and you as a writer need to check their work to make sure they're getting it right, because there can definitely be something lost in translation as your submission, it gets into its final form. Luckily, if it's a good publisher, I can't imagine a publisher working differently than this. They will send you a version of the work, kind of a print proof before it actually goes to the stores, or gets submitted to like Amazon.com or something like that, where you can check over to make sure that all your carefully created work hasn't been just ripped apart by a publisher and made to look like garbage. Kind of the way it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. So of all the things that writers do that, I guess from the writer's perspective, is not a big deal. Oh, I just changed the font on this, or I just, Word gives me the ability to do this or that other thing. What is the one thing, or a very small handful of things that give you the biggest headaches? That writers need to know. If you're doing this, you're possibly slowing down the publication of your work.
There isn't too much. Really not too much. Any kind of technical department at a publisher you'll be working with can usually, if they're a good publishing house, can turn whatever piece of garbage you give them into a book. That's their job. You as a writer, your job is to just get those words out into a document, and your publisher turns it into a book. There's really not too many things that I can't eventually turn into a book. If you're writing something in nonfiction, that's the biggest problem is nonfiction. Fiction is easy to work with. Fiction is just a bunch of paragraphs on a page most of the time. Nonfiction, if you're making a textbook, or you're making, you're doing a historical look into yada, 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 something like that. Try not to be too creative with how you're arranging the words on the page. Don't footnotes, like use endnotes. Footnotes in particular, you've probably read a book with footnotes. they just don't work very well on the print on an electronic form. There are some platforms that you'll be reading an ebook on that can show footnotes correctly, but footnotes themselves, and I won't get too into the weeds of why this is, just don't work very well in an electronic format. Footnotes are kind of an artifact of the printed age. In an electronic world, you don't really need footnotes. You would have some of your most advanced forms that say, a footnote is like a footnote at the end of a paragraph, and you would look down at the bottom of the printed page for a bigger description. Well, in an electronic form, there's more advanced ways of showing that information. You could have, a little link that you click as a reader, and a dialog pops up showing the information, or just, a link at the end of that paragraph. Some readers actually have a sidebar constantly where you're reading and there's a sidebar just showing you context sensitive information. There's many, many, many more advanced ways of showing things in footnotes today. So that would be it. Really just footnotes. Footnotes are something that at least once a year I'm having to explain to someone, no, that you're going to have to do this differently. It's the 21st century now. We don't have to print things like we were 300 years ago. There's better ways of doing it today.
So I guess one last thing I wanted to ask you about is, we've talked a lot about ebooks, but a lot of our students, some who've already talked to me, are interested in being maybe freelance writers for websites or online journals, where it's really going to only appear, I guess, in a browser window would be the best way to put it. Now, in some cases, like with blogs or that kind of thing, your personal information, you're putting that up yourself. What kinds of things, what kinds of things should they think about for the display of something in that way that's going to be different than an ebook, even if maybe they themselves have to manage the page in some way?
Honestly, not much that's different. It's pretty much the same thing. You'd be surprised how very similar it is publishing for the web as it is publishing for an ebook. I mean, an ebook is really just one way to think about it, it's a little mini packaged website. And every single ebook reader is like a little mini web browser. Now, that's not exactly how it works, but that is a very good way to look at it. And publishing for the web is the exact same as publishing for an ebook, in that you don't know exactly what it's going to be read on. It could be read on a big screen. It could be read on a small screen. It could be read on a screen that can only show black and white. It could be very commonly, if you're talking about accessibility reasons, a screen reader. That's somebody who is blind. They may need that page to be read out to them. So, that's one of my biggest bugaboos when it comes to publishing for the web is, have you thought about people who cannot see? How are they going to be consuming your content? That content needs to be available to be read by a screen reader. And if you don't know what a screen reader is and you're a writer, you really need to educate yourself, because there is a large amount of people out there that can't see and spend their whole day reading. That's something that's always been a thing I've cared about personally for 15 or 20 years. I've always made my work accessible. And there's been frameworks to make this accessible on the internet for as long as there's been the internet. And even today in 2021, I'm still having to explain to people, you need to make your work accessible to people who can't see. And just, as a publisher for the web, if you're going to be publishing your own stuff on the web, think about that. That is a major concern. And just from a design perspective, you'd be amazed how much better your work will look once you start factoring in these things. Like, because you may start thinking, okay, how is someone who can't see going to consume this media with a screen reader? And in the end, once you've made your work accessible, your work will just look better because of that. It will just be organized better. I don't know. It's just some magic that sort of happens when you do that.
Okay. Well, any last words of advice for our aspiring writers?
For aspiring writers, that's a tough
or aspiring writers and editors.
Never give up, no matter what. If you haven't had the realization that as a writer, you're not going to be rich anytime soon, you really please know that. Just write. Never stop writing. no matter what. Never give up. Always write. Somebody will read your work. I may read your work. Who knows? Yeah.
All right. Well, Michael McNamara, founder of Witan Publishing, technical architect, and general all-around digital electronic publishing guru. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.